Come on. There we go. Don't need to hear myself. Get the chat popped out.
So she might be starting ice skating lessons again in a fortnight.
Looks like people really prefer the YouTube version, since I'm seeing a lot more people on YouTube than I am on the Zoom. Give it a few more minutes to see how people line up, but reminder for those of you who are on YouTube, please make sure that you give a little bit of patience for any comments you type in the text, and please do type them. But it does mean that there will be a delay since the YouTube is slightly behind the live feed. We'll give a few more minutes as we wait to see if others are going to join us. Just our usual buffer. I don't want to have it get longer and longer each time. Just as an update, while we're waiting the last minute to see if anyone else pops in, we do not as yet have an opening date for the synagogue. And it will probably be some time before we are able to get back in person for adult education. Even though we might be able to start having services soon, it'll be under very limited conditions in terms of attendance and spacing. And certainly the library does not afford us that opportunity. And as we're trying to minimize the cross traffic and therefore the cross contamination, adult education may stay online even after we've begun some limited in-person services. But make sure that you stay in touch with us. If you are not already on the Temple Israel email list, please send an email to office@tiflorida.org. Let them know you'd like to be on our list, and that way you'll be sure to get all of the latest information. All right, well, with that public service announcement and with my usual pause, I think we are good to go ahead and start. Let me just get up our text and then let me tell Zoom to show you to it. And we are going to that one. All right. Hopefully everyone is now seeing our lovely parasha from Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers. We are using Sefaria.org, great website as I like to promo all the time. And as you can see, it is Numbers 1. Numbers is, of course, the most common English name for this book of the Torah. And it is so called because the first subject matter that this section of the Torah deals with are the numbers of people. We are going to have a census. As we are in the 2020 year, we know that there is a census in the United States, which is of great importance. If you have not already responded to the census, please make sure you do so. As we're going to see, counting people is a very important concept in Judaism. As we've talked before, counting people for the right reason is good. Counting people as though they were objects is bad. That topic is going to be reinforced, I feel, through our commentary today. Let me just, I realize I don't have my YouTube chat up on the side. There we go. Now I can see if anyone has any questions through YouTube. So we are going to get underway. Numbers 1, verse 1. On the first day of the second month, in the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt. All right, I'm going to interrupt myself to point out that we are now in the second year of the second month. The second month would, of course, be the month of ER, the month that we are currently in, although we are just finishing it as we begin the new month of Sivan next Saturday night. So it has been 2 years since we left Egypt. We had the first year and then the second year, most of which was spent at the foot of Mount Sinai. If you are familiar with what the plan was when we first camped at Mount Sinai, and what has been hinted at for a few times during the book of Leviticus, then you know that it is eventually our object to move on to the land of Israel, or what will become known as the land of Israel, but what is referred to at this stage in its history as the land of Canaan, or Canaan in modern English. So for 2 years they sat there, but they were busy. They had built themselves the Mishkan, and they had received the Torah, and they had learned how to live a Jewish life. Now they're going to put that in practice on the march. So at this point, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai and in the tent of meeting, saying, notice again, it is now God speaking to Moses from the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed. This is now going to be the seat of communication, as opposed to a vision which might occur anywhere, which is what Moses had experienced during his time in Egypt when he was confronting Pharaoh, or at Mount Sinai, which was the specific location of that experience that was had not only by Moses, but also at the giving of the Ten Commandments by the entire nation. Now it is going to be localized in the Ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting. And as you can see, this is God's order, which is why what comes next is going to be an acceptable counting of people. Take a census of the whole Israelite community by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male, head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups, from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. Okay, and here we know what the purpose of this census is and why God is making the people have this count. The fact that we need to measure the people that are fit to bear arms and that begins at the age of 20 is reminding us that this is a preparation for a war. There is an expectation that when we enter the land of Israel, of Canaan, that some of the people who are currently living there are not going to willingly allow us to reclaim our home. And therefore, we have to be prepared for a fight. And in order to know how to prepare for a fight, we need to have a count. And so therefore, that is the core feel, core meaning, the core feeling of the census. Scroll down a little bit. Associated with you shall be a man from each tribe, each one the head of his ancestral house. So this means that there is going to be an individual leader of each tribe that will be a assistant, attendant, representative of that particular tribe. And then we get the list beginning with verse 5. These are the names of the men who shall assist you. Notice they are being appointed. So we have a little bit less worry about people complaining of favoritism. After all, if God is picking the person, then that should be fine. A little side note, by the way, it is interesting to see that what began with the first brotherly reaction in the story of Cain and Abel, which was jealousy between two brothers over God's favor, we have now reached from the time of Ephraim and Manasseh, the two children of Joseph born in Egypt, through this stage, where brothers do not seem to have the same level of antagonism one to the other. That's not a permanent change, unfortunately. We are still human, and we do see throughout the rest of Tanakh brothers who will sometimes quarrel and fight over their standing. But at least at this point in our history, this is one thing that the families do not seem to be complaining about, which is a welcome change. From Reuben, Elitzur, son of Shedur. From Shimon, Shalumiel, son of Zerushadai. From Judah, Nachshon, son of Aminadab. From Issachar, Netanel, son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliav, son of Chalon. From the sons of Joseph. Remember, Joseph himself did not have his own tribe at this point, but instead two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, had been given in his place, and so each of them have representatives. From Ephraim, Elishama, son Amihud. From Manasseh, Gamaliel, son of Pedahozur. From Benjamin, Abidan, son of Gidoni. From Dan, Ahiezer, son Amishadai. From Asher, Pagiel, son of Ochran. From Gad, Eliashaph, son of Deuel. And from Naphtali, Ahira, son of Enan. Those are the elected of the assembly, the chieftains of their ancestral tribes. They are the heads of the contingents of Israel. The interesting term here, contingent, I've discussed in other classes. The word that's actually used in the Hebrew is alfei, which is the composite form when using the word thousand. However, in context, as many commentators point out, it is not talking about literal thousands because the counting would not work, but instead that word alafim can mean that it is a large cohort, a large group of some indeterminate number. Sometimes it might be more than 1,000, sometimes it might be less than 1,000. There are many commentators who argue that this word is more of a military term than a specific counting of people. More like a unit of people, which could have more or fewer than other units that are given similar jobs. So Moses and Aaron took those men who were designated by name, and on the first day of the second month, they convoked the whole community who were registered by the clans of their ancestral houses, the names of those aged 20 years and over being listed head by head. As the Lord had commanded Moses, so he recorded them in the wilderness of Sinai. Now, from verse 20 on, we are going to get the specific breakdown of each and every tribe, telling us exactly how many people are fit to bear arms from the age of 20 and up for each of those tribes. We are not going to run through all of those. Instead, I'm going to pause for just a moment, give you a chance to ask a question about the census and everything else that is just happening and all that I've just said. And then we will continue with the commentary on what all of this counting means. A reminder as I pause for the YouTube to catch up and for people to write questions. You can write questions at any time. If I am explaining some facet or giving some interpretation and you would like more information or you'd like to offer an additional interpretation, please feel free to go ahead and type that into the text as it is live. You do not need to wait for me to pause. I'll be more than happy to pick it up in the text box and comment on it when I can. All right, I think we would have caught up by now, so let's go ahead and move to our commentary. Because the thing that is quite shocking about all of this, I think we can make that a little bigger and still not lose the text off the sides. I should say, as always, one of the things that is quite shocking about all of this is how much emphasis there seems to be on actually counting up people and having the numbers. And in this and many other parts of the Torah, having the names of people who are seemingly inconsequential. Do we need to know the names of these people that are helping with the counting? Do we need to know the names of people who are bringing gifts later on? Do we need to know the names of all the who begat whom between Adam and Noah and between Noah and Abraham? Do we need to have a count of the people? Can't we just say there is a whopping great army that is there supporting Moses? Excuse me. That's going to have to go to voicemail. People are just going to say that there is a huge army and, you know, we can not really bother with the actual number. As you'll see from reading the rest of the Torah, which if you've not already done so, stay with it and you'll get there by the end of the year, that it never matters how big our army is. God never says our army is too big. God never says our army is too small when we are traveling through the desert. And when we are fighting, it never seems to be dependent upon the size of our army. And so having a number seems completely irrelevant. But as you'll see from the commentaries today, knowing each person and recognizing that each person is important is very much at the heart of how the Torah, and by extension, how God looks at the world and wants us to look at the world as well. Quick question down here. According by number of names, why not number of people? Right, so the number of names is the number of people. It's basically like having individual people. But as just saying, recognizing that each person has a name is saying that each person is more than just a tick in a census box. Excuse me. Excuse me. That each person is more than just a tick, more than just a digit, but they have a name. They have a real identity. This is something that is unfortunately lost during the current pandemic by many people who focus on the various tallies to the exclusion of the individuals that are sick or are suffering. But behind each number of those who have died is a real life that has been ended and many other lives that have been affected by their passing. By each life, by each number that is there of someone who is sick, that is a real person who is currently battling the illness. By each number that is there of somebody who is unemployed, that is somebody who has lost their income and has had a huge disruption for themselves and their family. They are not just numbers and stats and percentages, they are real lives. Other question. I understand the count. So Royce asked, I understand the count, but why weren't women and children counted for a complete number? And as Yerach responded, it was accounting for the army. Indeed, this was purely a military count. As we talked about earlier when we discussed censuses and King David's mistake when counting a census, there's the proper reason to count a group of people. In this particular case, the counting because there will be an army that will need to be staffed and need to be supplied and will need to be used in war. And then there is an improper reason, which is counting just to see how much you've got. And the idea that here we are counting for a proper purpose might have been contaminated if it was just trying to say how many people there were. God is not trying to brag about the size of our people. Moses is certainly not trying to brag about the size of our nation. Instead, it is just a practical matter of preparing for a specific purpose. But all of those individuals, men, women, and children, do all matter in the full scheme of life. We see, though, this idea of counting and arraying ourselves dominates this whole section of Bamidbar. And if we look at Midrash Rabbah, the great Midrashic collection on Bamidbar, we see the following teaching. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself upon Mount Sinai, 22,000 angels descended with Him, and they were all arrayed under separate banners. When Israel saw them so arrayed, they began to long for banners too, and said, "Oh, that we also could be arranged like them." God said to them, "How eager you are to be arranged by banners! I shall fulfill your desire." God immediately informed Israel by telling Moses, "Go, arrange them in camps by banners as they desired." The implication here is that it wasn't God that wanted to arrange us as we will eventually be arranged in the camp around the Mishkan, but that there is perhaps a human need, that there is a feeling of wanting to belong in different groups, of wanting to feel a part of something grand and wanting to feel like you are part of an assembly. Certainly this is true for, I think, most of us. And therefore our arrangement, both through the census and then the after arrangement of the tents, was a response to our need rather than a response to God's need. It wasn't that God just wanted us to be lined up in a particular way. It was we wanted to be gathered, and this was the way that God was instructing us to fulfill that desire. However, ultimately, it is not just about being part of a large group. It's not about just belonging to a banner of a particular tribe or even the banner of all of the people of Israel. The individual still has their own role to play and still has their own obligation. As the Talmud teaches, this is from Yoma 35b, Hillel, the great rabbi, serves to convict the poor. Rabbi Elazar ben Harsom, the rich, and Joseph, the wicked. That is, the Joseph, meaning the son of Jacob. What do they mean by convict? Well, to the poor man they say, "How come you did not engage in Torah study?" If he says, "I was poor and preoccupied with earning my living," they say to him, "Were you even poorer than Hillel? Every day he would work as a day laborer and earn a pittance. Half he paid for tuition to the bouncer at the Beit HaMidrash, the school, and the other half he spent for food for himself and his family." So if someone tries to say, the reason I couldn't, ... in this particular case, the emphasis is on studying Torah. If someone says, I couldn't study Torah because I'm too poor to study, they say, are you poorer than this guy, right? Hillel, who eventually became one of the greatest rabbis of all time, he was so poor that he would work day by day. He didn't even have a farm, right? He would just hire himself out as a day worker, and he would work that day, and then he would use half of what he had made to study, and the other half was what he and his family would live on. Surely you're not poorer than that, and therefore you have no excuse for not studying. To the rich man, they say, how come you did not engage in Torah study? If he says, I was rich and preoccupied with managing my funds, they say to him, were you ever richer than Rabbi Elazar? His father left him 1,000 towns and on shore and 1,000 ships at sea. So Someone else might say, I couldn't study, I was too rich. Being rich, I was busy. I had to take care of my business. It was huge, and you can't understand how much pressure there is when you're in the head of such a business. But Rabbi Elazar, he was the son of somebody who was so wealthy that they had comings and goings and merchant ships all across the Mediterranean. And therefore, you cannot tell me you are busier than him. And yet he also found time to study and become a great rabbi. So your excuse that you're rich does not work. To the wicked person, they say, how come you did not engage in Torah study? I hear they're talking about a particular type of wickedness. They're talking about somebody who is, shall we say, loose with his chastity. If he says, I was good looking and preoccupied with fulfilling my sexual desires, they say to him, were you better looking than Joseph? The implication would be, if I wasn't so attractive to the ladies, then I would have been able to study. But what are you going to do with a face like this? Well, we know Joseph. Joseph was able to resist the temptations that were offered to him, even while he was a slave, and it would have behooved him to give in. And so too, we have to say that no matter how handsome or attractive you are, that is no excuse for being derelict in your duty to morality. So the interesting thing that has come during this particular pandemic experience is for people who always would say, oh, I'm too busy to go to services, or I'm too busy to go to class, or I'm too busy to volunteer, and many of whom now find themselves much less busy, if they still answer that they cannot go to services even when it is virtual, or they cannot go to class or study even when it is just online and a short phone or laptop away, or if they still say they cannot volunteer because they are too busy, then perhaps it is not being too busy or too worried or too anything that is the actual barrier. Perhaps it is still something about their inherent choice. And they may choose a different excuse at different times for different things, but they need to look deeper if they want to find the reason for what it is that is blocking them from doing what they know would be right to do. Indeed, as we get to the next paragraph, we'll see that this is something that we will all be confronted with when we reach heaven. Rabbi Raphael of Barshad said, when I get to heaven, they will ask me, why didn't you learn more Torah? And I'll tell them, I'm slow-witted. Then they'll ask me, why didn't you do more kindness for others? And I'll tell them, I am physically weak. Then they'll ask me, why didn't you give more tzedakah? And I will tell them that I didn't have enough money. But then they'll ask me, if you were so stupid, weak, and poor, why were you so arrogant? And for that, I won't have an answer. It is a beautiful reminder that the person who begs off of poverty, who begs off of lacking intelligence, or who begs off of not having the skills or physical stamina to help others, to volunteer, to learn, all of the things that people will know that would be good to do, but say they can't do. Nevertheless, they never take the moment to say then, well, the one thing I can be then is humble. If I truly am not clever enough to study, which by the way is never true, but if I truly were, and if I truly were too poor to help another person who was in need, and if I truly were too weak to never do goodness for another person, then I have to be pretty humble about who I am, because I have to be then the worst off person in the entire world, because everyone should be able to do at least a little of all of those things. And yet it is very often that people who will beg forgiveness for not being able to do these things because of their personal limitations, nevertheless have a very high opinion of themselves, even as they say, I can't. Give a quick second for the YouTube to pause and catch up.
Rabbi, I have a question about the paragraph before.
Yes.
I didn't know there was a bouncer at the Bet Midrash.
So bouncer is a translation choice. There was somebody who stood at the door, and you had to pay to get in, and you paid daily tuition. Now, in the modern world, you might call that the ticket attendant, but bouncer, I think, is a clearer term, because the person was usually of substantial size. They were there to make sure people were kept out. This became a very long-running discussion within the rabbinic world during the Mishnah time of exactly who could and could not be admitted to the Beit HaMidrash. Some sides favoring it being more exclusive, other sides favoring throwing open the doors. Eventually, throwing open the doors was what won out. But at the time of Hillel, it was still not exactly an open school.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You may not be surprised to know, since I know quite a bit about your background, if you want to go to a Jewish day school, or if you want to go study in a yeshiva, if you want to go study at the conservative seminaries around the world, there is a tuition. Now, most of them do have generous financial aid packages, but they do survive based off the money that they charge for those who come to study. Personally, if you want to put me up on my soapbox for a little bit, I'd like to point out that the Jewish world as a whole has the resources to give a free Jewish education to every man, woman, and child. And there's no reason why we should have to charge for any of our educational institutions. But unfortunately, that has not been the top priority of all of our institutions. And it would take a degree of cooperation to be able to aggregate our funds to make that possible, that I'm not sure we're yet able to do.
Maybe you learned that from your mother.
I think, many people who work in education have a similar feeling. It's just unfortunate that the people who fund education don't always have that feeling.
Right.
All right. So, but if we are thinking that we can't do all of these things, if we think that there is some high standard that we are going to fail to meet, does that mean that we can do nothing? Does that mean that if I am limited, that I can never truly become great? Well, we can see again, taken from the Talmud, that that's not the way that we measure greatness, or at least not the only way that you should think to measure greatness. Said Rav Nachman, may I be rewarded for observing 3 meals on Shabbat. In the classic world, and really until the modern world, it was normal for a person to only have 2 meals each day. And then on Shabbat, there was a 3rd meal set aside, Seudah Shlishi, and that was a special meal because you got to eat 3 times on Shabbat. It made the day that much more enjoyable and that much more special for the people. Nowadays, the people are used to 3 meals a day. Unfortunately, Seudah Shlishi doesn't get the same emphasis that it used to. But what Rav Nachman is saying is that he was particularly careful to observe the 3 meals on Shabbat, and he was particularly passionate about it, that he devoted his kavanah fully to this act and did it with such a full heart, with such powerful intention and mindfulness, that this is what he was saying: if God is going to reward me for anything, it will be for this. Said Rav Yehuda, may I be rewarded for observing the requirement of true introspection in prayer. Again, not something that requires any material effort, but only requires internal, psychological, and philosophical introspection. Said Rav Huna ben Rabbi Yoshua, may I be rewarded for never walking 4 cubits bareheaded. The idea that we would always be showing respect to God's presence by wearing a covering on our head, just as until very recently in our parts of the world, everyone would do. If you went out of your house, you always wore a hat. It wasn't until the late 1950s and then into the 60s that hats really began to drop off in Western society. But if you would wear a hat for another person, why would you not wear a hat for God? If you would wear a hat when you go out because someone else might see you, then you would continue to wear a hat even when you are at home, because God can see you there as well. Said Rav Sheshet, may I be rewarded for carrying out the mitzvah of tefillin. Again, it may sound like, well, yes, that is a normal routine mitzvah. Of course, you need to be doing this. But he is saying that he hopes that his reward will come in a way that is commensurate, is proportional to his passionate observance of this commandment. Said Rav Nachman, may I be rewarded for carrying out the mitzvah of tzitzit. Again, in a similar vein. Said Abaye, may I be rewarded, for when I saw a novice rabbi who had completed his tractate, I made it a festival day for the rabbis, meaning he threw a feast so that everyone could celebrate in this young person's accomplishment. So even if it is just a singular moment where a person wholeheartedly committed themselves to the observance of a commandment at that moment, that is enough to unlock a reward that we cannot even begin to imagine. It is not about being the smartest. It is not about being the most generous. It is not about being the most devout in everything. It is about finding at least a few things, one thing that you can fully say, this is mine. This commandment is something that drives me, where I find my passion and where I'm able to connect to God, because in my observance of it, in my fulfilling of it, I can be completely wholehearted. And it doesn't matter what size the commandment is. It only matters what size your commitment is to doing so. And sometimes even the doing is not exactly what is needed. So there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement in the late 18th century, the late 1700s. And the story goes as follows. When the Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening his people, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. So he was considered to be a wonder worker, and he had this particular ritual. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason, meaning there was misfortune coming, to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I am still able to say the prayer. Again, the miracle would be accomplished. So even though he couldn't do exactly what his teacher had done, he could do some, and that was enough. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save his people once more, would go into the forest and say, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. It was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rizin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. I am unable to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, and I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient. So you would think, as indeed many people have over the centuries, that without all of the rituals that we had in Leviticus, without all of the ways that we could observe the Torah when we were in the days of the temple in the land of Israel, that we would have lost our ability to connect fully to God. But what this story and many others of similar type try to tell us is that although the rituals are absolutely important for continuing to build discipline and focus within a person and for the transmission of their meaning, that ultimately, even if we are unable to do the particular action because of some external event that is preventing us, we can still connect to the same power of that action. We can still have the same effect as though we offered a sacrifice in Jerusalem. We can still have the same effect as though we had left the corners of our field for the poor, because we continue to talk of them. We continue to be inspired by them. We continue to wish that we were able to do all that God has asked us to do if we lived in a world where all of that was possible. And that is sufficient. The physical activities are sometimes not always at our disposal, but the passion to want to do them always is available to us if we are willing to let ourselves be moved. I'm going to give another pause while I have another drink. Just a second. There we go. When Rav Zusa was dying and all his students were gathered around him, praying and crying, Zusa also began to cry. And one of his students said, Rav Zusa, why are you crying? You have lived a righteous life. You have raised up students. and you will be received into the world to come. Rav Zrusa answered his students, I am crying because now I understand that if God will ask me, Zrusa, why weren't you like Moses? I will have a ready answer. Lord, you didn't give me the potential you gave to Moses. If the Almighty will ask me, Zrusa, why weren't you like Maimonides? I will also have a ready answer. Lord, you neither gave me the gifts nor did you place me in a position similar to Maimonides. But the Master of Universe will not ask me these questions. He will ask, Zrusa, why weren't you like Zrusa? One of the more powerful teachings I have always found from the Hasidic world of reminding us that God is not asking us to be like the archetypes of our people. God is not asking us to be Moses. God is not asking us to be David. God is not asking us to be Rambam. God is not asking us to be anyone else other than who we are. God is not asking of us anything that is beyond our capability and our potential and our place in our world at this time. That's it. And we all have the ability to fulfill what it is that God has asked, because God has tailored that request specifically to each of us. And if we feel we can't be Moses, if we feel we can't be Rambam, if we feel we can't be David, good, you're right, you can't be, and you shouldn't be, right? Moses was Moses because he was Moses, and you should be you because you're you. And trying to be someone else is a recipe for failure. But even worse than being a recipe for failure, it becomes a blinder. It prevents you from being who you are meant to be, from allowing yourself to see your own unique gifts and talents, to see your own unique form of spirit and what you can do with it in this world. If you are always thinking that you must measure to someone else's yardstick, then you'll never be able to reach the full measure of yourself. When God asked Moses to count each of the people, I think he was doing more than just preparing them for battle, but he was reminding each of the people that they counted. Each of them had a role to play, and their role was not the same as Moses, and it wasn't the same as Aaron, and it wasn't the same as Miriam, but it was the same, but it was unique and it was equally powerful for each of them. That is something that gets too often lost. We wonder, oh, if only I could be a great philanthropist, if only I had the money like the Gates do to give, if only I had the ability to change the world and cure disease, if only I was brilliant like this doctor or brilliant like that scientist, if only I was creative or if only I could sing, then I would be able to do this and do that. And it's fine to appreciate the amazing gifts and talents of the other people around us and the other people who have influenced the world, and even those who grab the headlines. But to do so in a way that makes you despair of what you can add, of what you can contribute, is to forget that God chose to have you be alive. And for you to be alive, there must be a reason for what you can do. You may not know it yet, or you may, but in any event, you have that opportunity in this world, in this way, to live in something that no one else can quite duplicate. No one else can quite do the same. So it says in our YouTube comments, this is from John, this is reminiscent of the calling of Jeremiah. He was unlike the others, but what he needed to be. Indeed, Jeremiah is often considered to be a bit of the crotchety prophet, the one who was most grumbly and often quite angry. But he was exactly the person that was needed for his day. And although he was unable to sway the nation around him, the way some of the previous prophets, most notably Isaiah, had, the message that he gave was a message that was absolutely essential for the survival of our people beyond the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And had he tried to be Isaiah rather than trying to be Jeremiah, then our whole course of history might have been different and might have ended with that destruction by the Babylonians. But he was willing to live up to the possibility that God had put within him to be him. And with that, he was able to change everything. But you don't even have to be the great of Isaiah. You don't have to be the great of Jeremiah. There were countless other people who lived at that day and age, and all of their decisions are what allowed our people to survive and allowed their families to survive. Each one of us has that calling. Each one of us has that power. Each one of us has that responsibility. And hopefully, if you found yourself with a little more free time lately, or questioning life a little bit more and how we've gone about living and what our society is like, you may be able to see a bit more clearly what it is that you are passionate for and what it is that God is asking you to do, and to find ways to do it. There is nothing that can prevent you from living up to your calling and your potential, because God gave that calling and potential to you, knowing full well what this life would be like.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I noticed one name that struck me because I didn't recognize where it came from. There is a midrash about a man named Nashon, and in that listing of names, there is a man named Nashon. Is that the
Nachshon,
same Nashon?
that is the same Nachshon who walked into the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, in order to trigger it to part when we were crossing out of Egypt. That's the guy.
So it was the guy.
Yep.
I mean, he had to step in first,
Exactly
or
right.
someone had to.
And for that moment, it was him. Questions, comments, other reflections, other observations? I'll give a second for the YouTube to catch up again. But otherwise, we'll wrap it up. I know it's much harder to ask questions and to have the give and take, what we call the shaklavataria of a good discussion or even debate when we're in this virtual format. But I really do appreciate everyone sticking with the system and continuing to participate, whether it be by voice or whether it be by text, so that we can keep our study going. All right, seeing no other comments, we're going to go ahead then and wrap it up. And look forward to seeing those of you who will attend our Mishnah class tonight at 7 o'clock. And those who are going to our Pathway to Judaism class tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And if you need anything, please let me know. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and everyone is able to walk their own path. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Shalom.